This is how you make the sauce for tripe à la mode. Today on the French Chef.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. We're doing tripe today, and here it is. This is tripe à la mode. It's French soul food. It's earthy and has a wonderfully satisfying smell and taste. And I want you to show the tripe's native habitat, which is the complicated stomach of a ruminant, which means it's a beef's stomach. And you can see how complicated it is. It's made out of 4 parts, and this is an exploded drawing where they've just cut the stomach in half so you can see the inside of it. And there are 4 stomachs. There's the first stomach, the rumen, and the second stomach, the reticulum or honeycomb, and the omasum, and the abomasum. And this was a drawing made by my husband, and I think it's very, very nice to have some idea of exactly what this kind of what tripe is. And what it is the lining of all of these stomachs. It's not the stomachs themselves. As you can see here, there are walls of the stomachs, and that is what it is. And I wanted to see a whole tripe. I've seen them in France, but I haven't never seen them here, so I asked my meat man to get one. And this is about as whole a tripe as you can find, and it came down by express bus from New Hampshire, and it's enormously big, as you can see. This little pouch here is the honeycomb, which looks almost like a face, and these various tubes, I guess that's where there's a tube here. I suppose this is where everything comes into the stomach. And then you have a very heavy part here, which we usually don't find in this country, which is part of the first stomach. And this is called, in France, this is called gras double, which means that it's just very heavy. And in France, you often run into recipes calling for gras double, and it either means the first stomach or the thick tripe, or else it sometimes means tripe that's all 4 of the parts of the tripe cooked together. And all you have to do is warm it up. But it's interesting to know what they mean by that. But what we usually get is just honeycomb. There's that little part here. It's the second stomach from over here, which looks like a bathing cap. And this is, according to American lights, the finest and the best part of the tripe. And sometimes you can't even get any tripe at all because it just depends on where you live. And it just depends on supply and demand. Grandpa ate tripe with great relish, but nowadays you find a lot of people don't even know what tripe is. As a matter of fact, today somebody said to me, "Now, what are you going to cook today?" And I said, "Tripe, I hope you like it." And they said, "Oh, well, you know, I never tried it. And I lived away from the coast. And I don't really like fish very much anyway." So in other words, a lot of people don't know what it is. So no wonder that you can't find it at the markets. But if you happen to live in a market area where they like tripe and pig's feet and sort of soul food type things, you can get it. I live in a neighborhood, for instance, where we can get fresh tripe every Tuesday. And when you're looking for tripe, you find it in the refrigerated meat section of your market. And be sure that you look at it very carefully. It can either be frozen like this, hard as a rock, or fresh or unfrozen. But be sure that you look carefully at the label that it says fresh tripe, because you don't want pickled tripe for this kind of a recipe at all. And when you buy tripe in the markets nowadays, it's all been perfectly well washed and blanched, and it's ready to eat. Where's my big piece, my big bathing cap? There it is. And when you get it, you want to smell it. And you'll notice that tripe smells like tripe, just the way kidneys smell like kidneys, and liver like liver, and beef steak smells like steak. But presumably you can cook it right away. But what I always like to do, I like to wash it off thoroughly, and I like to soak it in, for about an hour or two in several changes of water. And then if you find that it smells rather more tripey than you like or than you're used to, just blanch it, meaning boil it in a big pot of water for 5 minutes, and then rinse it off, and if you want to, blanch it again, and that gives you a milder taste. And then when you're ready to cook it, you have to cut it up. You just use some big scissors, and your recipe will tell you what size to cut it in. In this case, we want to cut it into pieces of about 3 inches in size, either square or triangular. And no matter what kind of a tripe recipe you do, you start out exactly this way of the soaking, if you want to, and the blanching, and then the cutting, and then you're ready to go on with your recipe. And we're going to do a Normandy tripe recipe, which is tripe. Well, the great Normandy recipe is tripe à la mode de Caen, C-A-E-N. And here is a postcard from Caen itself with French stamps on it. And here is a beautiful picture of tripe. And this one, it has all the 4 parts of the tripe. And then you cook it with a special hard cider called cidre bouché. And you have calvados in it. And you have carrots and onions and so forth. And as you can see, also, there's this object here, which is a beef foot. And here is an actual beef foot. And if you're going to do it in the exact way, you should have the beef foot, because according to Escoffier, who has a very long and excellent recipe on tripe, the beef foot gives you the needed sort of gelatinous quality to the sauce. See, here it's almost syrupy. It's a marvelous consistency. But of course, you can't get a beef foot here very easily, so instead of a beef foot, you can get a pig's foot. If you can buy tripe, you can usually buy pig's feet. That's the way it is, a pig's trotter. And when you buy them, they usually are already split, and they've been cleaned and washed and all ready. And then you want to blanch them for about 5 minutes in boiling water, and rinse and drain them, and then they are ready to go. And if you happen to get a whole pig's foot like this, you can have it sawed in half perfectly well by the butcher. And the blanching, the reason you want to do that is so that it's just like when you're doing any kind of veal dish, you get a whole lot of scum. And blanching gets rid of that scum first so that you wouldn't get it when you cooked your tripe. And after blanching, that's what your little pig's feet halves look like. And we want 3 whole pig's feet, or 6 pieces, for this recipe. Now, if you can't, by any chance, can't get the pig's feet, you can use sawed veal knuckles. That's a whole veal knuckle. That's the knee of the veal, and you can just have it sawed up. And also, for additional of the gelatinous quality, you can get a piece of fresh pork rind and blanch that. But these are all essentials if you're going to get that wonderful sauce quality that is needed for this particular recipe. And now we can get to some more familiar ingredients, which are always easily available. And the proportions, these are going to be proportions for 2 whole honeycombs, or 5.5 to 6 pounds of tripe. And this is tripe. The tripe is simmered in wine and vegetables and cooked for a very long time. And this, you have to get your aromatic vegetables. Now we're going to have 6 cups of a combination of leeks and onions. That is the leek. And these are ready for cleaning. If you can't get leeks, just use onions alone and just slice them. And you don't have to slice them very fancily because all the sauce is going to be strained, so it's a somewhat rough cut. And you want 6 cups in all. That seems like a lot. They're your onions, peeled and sliced in the usual way. And then we want to have 2 cups of carrots, also sliced. And the carrots, you don't just scrub them off and then just slice them roughly. They don't even need to be peeled. So you see, once you finally get all your ingredients together, you're going to find this is a very easy recipe to do. And there's the full 2 cups. And now we need some garlic. And just, 3 or 4 big cloves of garlic. And these also, you don't need to do anything but just cut in 2 or 3 pieces. And you can leave the skin on, because the skin also has flavor. And then there's going to be seasonings. And we want 1 tablespoon of salt. You can use either kosher salt or regular salt. And then we want about 10 peppercorns. That would be about a half teaspoon. And then 10 allspice berries. And if you don't have allspice berries, use just about a half teaspoon of allspice. And 2 nice big imported bay leaves. And do use the imported kind, because the regular sort of California laurel has too much of a, it doesn't have the right taste if you're doing a French recipe. And then stir this all around. You see, it's convenient putting it all in a bowl, because then you can have everything mixed nicely together. Now, tripe's ready, vegetables ready. What are you going to cook it in is a question. This here is a French called a tripière, with a rather small mouth and a rather fat body. And this is made out of a nice, homely brown, high-fired earthenware. But you don't have to have a special pot. You can use a regular enameled iron casserole. You could use a nice big Boston bean pot. And here's a handsome hand-thrown pot that comes from New England, and I'm going to use this one, which is going to work out very nicely. You need, if you can get a 6 to 8 quart, as you're going to see, you need quite a bit of room. And now this is going to be assembled in layers. We have just the vegetables here, and you put a handful of vegetables in the bottom of your casserole, and then 3 pig feet, or sawed, blanched veal bones, and some blanched rind. Now here's the tripe that's been cut up. And you're going to see later why it's been cut up into such sort of large, recognizable pieces. Then on go some more vegetables, and the rest of the tripe. And you don't want to fill the casserole too full, or you're going to have a little trouble in the oven. So that's why you want a great big bowl for it. And now we have the pig's feet that go on top, or your bones if you had them. And then you have the liquid, which I have down here, which if you didn't have that dry cider, you can use dry white wine, or you could even use water. And this is a macon. And you want the wine to come up just to the top. And if you don't have quite enough, you can add a little chicken stock, or you can just add some water. Now that's just almost come up to the top, which I think is enough. And now you want to have this is going to have a protective fat covering. And this is so that you can protect the tripe and keep it from darkening and sort of crusting over while it cooks. So you want either beef suet or pork fat. And you just want to, and this is cut just about ½ an inch thick. And you just want to cover that whole thing. I hadn't realized how important this was until I really carefully began reading recipes about it and found that you just really have to have the fat, and it makes a great deal of difference. I'm going to have to get some more water here because I have another thing that I need it for. And I noticed that I don't have quite as much liquid in there as could be. It's interesting that in several of the recipes from Normandy that I read, they said if you don't have the right cider, which is going to darken your tripe, use water instead. And now this has to cook. It's going to cook for 12 hours in the oven, which is a long time, but it's going to cook very, very slowly. And if you have the kind of casserole that you can put on top of the stove, I've got this on a trivet, put it on top of the stove and let it just come to the simmer, and that will hurry things up a little bit. And then after it's come up to almost just to the simmer, you want to cover it. And there are two ways of covering it. One is the modern way. You have to remember that in a lot of these old recipes, they were written hundreds of years ago before people had the right pots or the right ovens. And so with this one, put wax paper on the top, and then some aluminum foil, and then the cover. And that's the modern way of doing it. And then it would go into the oven. You see that's nicely covered there. And then you have an old-fashioned alternative, which is rather fun, which is a dough cover. Now, where did I put my water after having so carefully gotten it? Well, I just don't have to get some more. That casserole is so big. Now, what we want is a dough cover. Is take 1 cup of all-purpose flour, ½ a cup of cake flour. This is to make it so that you're not going to have too much gluten, because you want to make a very thick flour paste that's not going to shrink. And just stir that up. And then that is going to go right on top of that fat. And the reason for that is, and this is going to be about ½ an inch thick, and the reason for this is that this will again protects your tripe from being burned and by too much heat in the oven. And also, as I found by doing it, when you have it in, it also absorbs quite a bit of the fat, so that you have much less fat to degrease. And push that right up against the sides of the casserole. And this is another thing, you don't want to fill it too full. And also, I tried the other day because it was I had the casserole too full, and I had the dough that covered all over the top and went down over the sides. And then, because everything does sink down while it's cooking, the whole dough cover cracked and split open, so that it hadn't been useful. And now with the dough cover, this goes on after it's come to the simmer, and then you put it in the oven until the dough has crusted over, and then you put on foil and then the cover, and it takes about 2 hours for the dough to crust over. And when it goes to the oven, I find it wise to have a drip pan underneath, See, there's that little pan. Because sometimes it begins to bubble over and down the sides, and if you have a little pan, that can catch your dribbles. And this, it really needs 12 hours of cooking, or even 14 or maybe even 16. But the important thing is when it cooks that it has to go very, very slowly, just sort of hardly bubbling. And the reason for that is if it cooks too fast, it would throw the tripe up over the fat, and then it would begin to scorch and burn. So what you want it is to go so slowly that the fat really never gets disturbed. And in France, they always cook it in a baker's oven, le four d'un boulanger. That would be rather fun, I think. So here we are, done. And you can cook this longer than 12 hours if you'd like. It can go really about as long as you want. Some people even say 18. But I think that would also depend on if you had not brought it to the simmer first. You would have to. It would take quite a bit longer. And now, there you are. There's that dough cover, and there's a little bit of fat that's come on up over it. But it smells so good. Well, it should with all that wine and everything else in it. And now you take off. The dough cover usually shrinks a little bit, but you just take it off. It's inedible. Look at it underneath. See that soft? That's absorbed quite a bit of the fat, and here's here's that fat layer, but that is nicely protected. Its precious contents. I have cooked the tripe without the dough and without anything else, and it's been very good, but I just don't think it has been quite as good as this. Besides, it doesn't seem as indigenous as having all of this sort of old-fashioned stuff on it. And now you have to drain it so that you can get all the fat out. And you want to separate take out the pieces of tripe. So this again shows you why you have the tripe cut in recognizable pieces. You could perfectly well serve it as it is, but you have all kinds of little bones. There's a little pig's foot bone, and so forth. So take it all out. I'm not going to do all of this because it would takes too long. But you now have your juices, which need to be skinned, because you've got to skim the fat off. And you can do it. Either you can skim all the fat off by hand, or you can freeze it and then just lift the fat off, or you can use a gadget. And we have this gadget here, which is just for degreasing. And you pour your juices in here, and the fat comes up to the top. It has a little stopper, and you lift that up and let the juices go out, and then put the stopper back in to stop the fat. Or you can use a regular separatory funnel. This is a chemist's thing, and it has a little faucet here. And I got this one half price because it has a long glass tube that broke off. But that holds about 2 quarts. And you have to put a funnel into the funnel, and then you dip your juices in. Oh, I didn't turn off the faucet properly. Well, that's what to show you how neat this is. See, look at the fat has all risen to the top. Then you put it over a bottle and turn on the faucet and just let it run through, until it comes down right to that fat level. Whoop! You turn off the faucet, and then the fat you can just drain into another bottle and just throw it out. So, that really works out very nicely indeed. But I think it's interesting that there really is not an enormous amount of fat on those lovely juices. But another important thing is that you have to be sure to have your casserole very, very hot. I mean, and when you're degreasing the sauces, you have to have the sauce very hot, because with all of this marvelous gelatin kind of juicy sauce, it begins to congeal just as gelatin does as soon as it gets cold. So you can do this nicely ahead, and you can let it cool off, but then you must heat it up before you're ready to serve, and you must be very sure to serve it on very, very hot plates. That's just because of this lovely sauce consistency. So, there we go, nice and hot, and into the dining room without delay. There. Now I'm going to, and you serve it on sort of soup plate. And I think it makes a perfectly lovely Sunday lunch type of dish, and give it a bit of sauce. And then it's usually in France, it's served with boiled potatoes. And then you can serve wine with it or cider. I think cider is extremely good with it. It's just a marvelous dish. It's got such a delicious sauce to it, and that wonderful, subtle aroma of wine and good cooking that just sort of floats throughout your house all those 12 hours that it's in the oven. I just really love tripe cooked this way. And I've just been dying to do it for you all these years. And so finally, here it is, tripe à la mode. That's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
This program was made possible by a grant from Polaroid Corporation. Julia Child is the author of From Julia Child's Kitchen, which includes the recipes from this program.